Welcome to the Decentralized Opportunity Podcast, a weekly podcast discussing innovative ideas in business and technology from unconventional and often overlooked sources. I'm your host, Tanner Lytle, here with your other host,
Wyatt Tanner. Our interview lineup keeps getting better and better. Nothing against the people we've already interviewed, but we just keep building our calendar, filling it. And we have a really special guest today. His name's Karl Swanepoel, and he's from Wales. And he's jumped in a call with us today to discuss his adventures. And it fits right in with Decentralized Opportunity. We're talking about creating entrepreneurial opportunities and founders from unique areas, not about how not everyone has to be from Silicon Valley to start an amazing startup or found a new business. And Karl is a fantastic example of exactly that. So I'm really excited. Why don't you introduce us and give us some information?
Sure. Well, thanks very much for having me. I'm very excited to talk to you today. I am a startup founder. I founded Revolancer about 2 years ago when I was in my final year of university, but I actually started quite a while before that. So at the age of 14, I decided that I wanted to be my own boss. Immediately started with trying to freelance online, kind of grew frustrated with current platforms. So I tried to build a better platform. And kind of where I have built so many different projects, far too many to mention. Most of them failed miserably, but it's given me a lot of experience that I've been able to carry forward. And now, be in a fortunate position where I can run my business full time, and we're growing. We're doing our second funding round at the moment, directly out of university, because I have been doing this kind of since the age of 14. So yeah, for me anyway, quite an exciting journey. Looking forward to discussing it some more.
Yeah. Well, you said something like you were 14 and realized that you wanted to be your own boss. Those things, that's really early to realize that. I started working at McDonald's when I was about 14. So can you go kind of dive a little bit more in depth on like how you came to that realization?
It's kind of weird. I have really thought about this. It's kind of just a feeling that I had, like a gut feeling. I think it must have been, being in school and sort of them talking about career advice and starting to think more about what I want to do with my life. And I think I just kind of came to the realization that I would make a terrible employee and I would get fired immediately. So, I kind of thought that I've always been very passionate about creating things and building things. And I had a big interest in technology. I taught myself how to build some basic websites, how to do some basic graphic design as well. And then I kind of thought, how can I build something and make money from it, and then do that full time, so I wouldn't have to go a kind of, the normal or traditional route. I really don't know. I kind of have a strange personality where I'll kind of like latch onto a certain idea and just not let go. And that's an example of that, where to the present day, this is, I just knew that was what I wanted to do. I went all in from then until now, and I'm sure I will continue to as well.
Very cool. So your story in entrepreneur, I mean, you look at your LinkedIn bio, we're talking Rocket Blast, Life Will, Leap into, now into Revolancer, which we'll talk a little bit more here shortly. But a lot of this kind of stemmed, where you are today, stemmed from winning a startup competition. You won the Engineers in Business Fellowship grant, then £150,000 in pre-seed funding. There's a lot of startups that wish any of those things would have happened to them. What do you believe was the major contributing factor to kind of this snowball, starting maybe with that startup competition? Did you really go in thinking you were going to be here today, or what was your hopeful goal coming out of that startup competition you did years ago?
Well, I mean, I was hoping I would win it, but I had no idea if I would or not. But what's quite funny is I'm a judge in that same competition now. I judged the year after, I entered last year, and now I'll be judging it again this year, which is quite exciting. But when I was talking to the other judges before the judging session last time, I asked them, why did they pick me? why did I win that? And they said, pretty much all of them said that the reason they picked me is because they knew that whether they gave me the funding or not, I was going to make it happen either way. So I think show being persistent and not setting your goal only to, either you win this competition and then all these great things will happen, or you don't win the competition, and then and then you just kind of wind things down, which I absolutely wouldn't have done, and I think they could see that too. So I think that's really the key to it. My goal isn't winning any one competition. My goal is to permanently change the freelancing industry and to improve it for the better. So, that's what I'm working towards. And then, if I sort of win a competition here or there along the way, that's fantastic. But whether I win it or not is not going to make any impact on whether I am motivated to continue or not. Whereas I think perhaps that might be more the mindset for some other people. They put a lot more weight into, an outcome of a situation like that.
Yeah, I actually myself got started my first business through a startup competition and winning that, and just a fantastic opportunity to find talent and find people and let people start their journey, fulfill their dreams. You mentioned persistence was one of the characteristics. Are there any other main characteristics that may be innately within someone or someone can work on that would lead to more success as a startup founder, as you see it?
Yes, I mean it's kind of linked to persistence because it's all about persistence, but kind of becoming okay with the idea of failing and not seeing it as the end of the world, and actually appreciating it for a learning opportunity, which it absolutely is. Like I said, most of what I've tried has failed. Most of the projects I've tried, I don't have on my LinkedIn profile. I mean, hell, I probably don't even remember some of them. Just sort of random websites I tried, or trying to sell this on eBay, or just this, that, and the other. But it changed the way that I think. It's the same way, like there's I can't remember where I kind of heard this. It's not my original thought though. But there's kind of that saying of, you read a book and you forget everything that you read in the book. But as long as the book changes you the way you think slightly, then you still really got value out of that. And I think it's very much the same here. Just try lots of things, whether you remember them or not doesn't really matter, but it changes the way you think and it helps develop your kind of gut feel moving forward. So I'd say, yeah, kind of just appreciate, a quote unquote failure for being a learning experience. And especially at a young age, if you're starting a business, there's a good chance that you don't have as many responsibilities. So if you fail, so what? There aren't people relying on you right now, for example. So don't be afraid of failing, within reason, because that's the best way to learn.
I always equated being a lifelong learner as being an important thing, and then recently kind of realizing that failure is learning. So if you say someone's a lifelong learner, you should really think of them also as a lifelong failure, and that's not a bad thing because again, you're growing with each part of it.
Absolutely.
Right. I'm a big fan of telling others about failure. There's a mantra: fail fast, fail forward, and fail cheap. If you're going to fail, do it early. Don't be so far down the road you can't back out. Fail forward, learn something out of your failure, and fail cheap. Hopefully you can fail before you've invested a ton of money in it, right? So, absolutely. So we see entrepreneurship from the American perspective, Tanner and I, and the other interviews we're doing. But for our American audience, maybe, could you maybe elaborate or tell us a little bit about the entrepreneurship vibe in the UK? Everyone here in America has an idea, and we started this podcast because we believe it's worldwide, of course, and you're a prime example of that. But what is the entrepreneurship startup environment like over there, Wales, UK in general?
Sure. So, I mean, Wales specifically, I think has a really, really good startup culture. So it's something that, they have government-backed organizations here like Big Ideas Wales and Business Wales, that kind of support entrepreneurship throughout school and kind of beyond that too. In England, I think, same again, there are some great organizations out there, but not so much government funded. But generally, I think there is more of an entrepreneurial culture in the States than there is in the UK or elsewhere in, throughout Europe for that matter. Which I think is it's a shame that it's lacking here a bit more. But yeah, I mean, I sort of can't compare it too much because I haven't lived in America, so but I have somewhat of an idea of the entrepreneurial culture there. But yeah, it's certainly stronger in the US, I would say. But it looks, especially in Wales, that the government and people in general are sort of building it up more and more.
Would you say that government support to the funding, the education, would you say that's a big kind of driver for its growth in Wales and could potentially be one of what's holding back some other areas that are not seeing the entrepreneurship growth? Is it the government support for these kinds of startups, would you believe, is a big factor?
I think so. It plays a huge role. I mean, there are some serious drawbacks to government funding as well, because oftentimes if you get a government grant, you have to deliver something in a very specific way. I have an example. I spoke to a founder recently who received a government grant to develop an app, and she realized that a website would actually be a smarter choice for her platform than an app. But because she wrote app, on the sort of the grant, that's what the money was for. She had to build the app. Same thing was she wrote that she would, need I think £5,000 worth of computer equipment. She didn't need that because she basically just needed a MacBook for her and her co-founder. But again, she had to spend that money on that specific thing. So obviously, if you raise investment privately, it's a different matter. But that being said, a lot of these sort of support schemes outside of just funding, more kind of you can talk to a business coach, get some feedback that way. There's a great scheme as well in Wales, backed by the government, where if you're a company with high growth potential, you can access certain support for free. So if you need a marketing expert, it'll be funded by the program. If you need a lawyer for a day, it'll be funded by the program. Things like that. So yeah, I'd say it does make a big difference, and I think the rest of the UK can learn from that.
Yeah. A huge thing for us here too is very community driven. So we have a lot of like incubators that are started up by for nonprofits or for profit entities like investors and things like that. Is that also more prevalent where you're at, things like that too, or is it more the government funded stuff?
Um, I'd say it's. I mean, from what I can tell, having spoken to lots of different investors and accelerators and so on, I'd say it's much more prevalent in the States. But you do get incubators in the UK too. I mean, there are great kind of startup communities, especially in co-working spaces here. So we work with a couple of great co-working spaces where there's a very strong startup culture. But again, my experience with those has been more so in Wales. So I think just generally the culture for entrepreneurship here is stronger. I think also because in Wales, as opposed to England, in some places where people live here, they kind of have to start a business. There aren't that many jobs available in their local area, so they have to start some kind of a project. Whereas in England, I think generally that's not so much the case. So I'm sure that drives it as well. But it certainly then also translates to boosting, tech startups and other kind of businesses as well.
That's well said. I like your input on Wales specifically, and maybe entrepreneurship is kind of a necessity, which is similar to where Tanner and I, we're in Nebraska. Nebraska's a population of, there are cities in the United States that have bigger population than our entire state, and it almost breeded out of necessity to find your own adventure, choose your own adventure, so to speak, right? And the benefits of being able. There's a perk in being rural or having not all of those opportunities, because it forces you to be a little bit more creative, a little bit more outside the box, and could push you to find something amazing like starting a business. So question in general, you've been doing this for years now. You started very young. What advice, UK, US, whatever, it doesn't matter, in general, someone who wants to either exit the rat race, as they call it, or maybe never even start it because they're 14 years old and have this crazy idea that they're never going to have a real job. Real job, that's not fair, but you know what I mean? What advice would you give people who are looking for maybe that change? Because I think that's one of the biggest drivers right now in entrepreneurship is people are seeing that being a corporate asset may not always pay off, and having a little bit more control over your life and destiny is really powerful. Do you have any advice for those people looking to make that change or never even enter that to start?
Well, I mean, I think it's important that you're very honest with yourself about if this is something you want to do. If it is, why? Are you trying to make money? In which case, go get a job in finance. Don't start a business if that's your primary motivator. So it kind of depends. I think you need to start by being very honest with yourself. If you do identify that this is definitely something that you do want to do, then you want to, well, I mean, then I'd say absolutely it's worth giving it a shot because you don't want to regret not having tried. And ultimately it comes down to just being, like we said before, being persistent, being willing to fail, but also, being very careful about listening to other people, which means in some ways you absolutely always want to listen to other people. You want to really consider what they say. But if they are speaking from a position of ignorance, like, for example, it's somebody just saying to you, I think that starting a business is a terrible idea when they've never started a business in the past, think about how much weight you want to put on that opinion. And maybe listen more to people who have done what you are looking to do before, and their opinion actually means more. So do listen to people. Don't assume that you know everything. Do listen to people, but select who you listen to basically based on their level of experience in what they're talking about. So I'd say that's quite an important thing, but also, kind of in a similar vein, don't compare yourself to other people. Only compare yourself to how you were yesterday or a week ago or a year ago or something like that. Never try and compare yourself to other people because you don't have the full story ever. But also, even if you did, how on earth is it productive to waste your time thinking about how you fit in alongside other people? Because either you're going to just kind of feel egotistical, or more likely you're going to feel upset about it. So it's not a useful exercise.
So when you're talking about like people to listen to, or I would even expand that to like people you want to work around, how do you go about, especially now that things are a lot more remote, like meeting people, finding people that are worth working with, whether that be employees, co-founders, mentors, all those things. How do you juggle this world where it's more remote forward?
Well, I mean, I'd say in many ways it's a lot easier because, you can reach out to someone on LinkedIn, or you can find their email, you could send them an email, that kind of thing. So in a lot of ways, it's much easier nowadays. In terms of how to get people, to reply to me, I mean, I recently, actually, towards the end of last year, I emailed Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, and he actually replied to me, which is kind of crazy. But it all came down to how I crafted the email, and also I found his personal email address, so that was obviously half of the battle. But in terms of I the subject line, if I remember correctly, was you're a huge inspiration to me, which kind of shows that it's quite personalized. And then the email went straight to the point, so I said I believe I said, Apple is a product of excellent engineering, not just great branding, which is, a compliment to him because, I think Steve Jobs is kind of associated with starting Apple and being the genius behind it, when in reality he was kind of the marketing and branding side, and Steve Wozniak actually did the legwork, in the early days. So immediately I'm complimenting him. I'm showing, that's a very personally crafted email. I then also related it to how I look up to my granddad, who was an engineer as well, related back to that because he's an engineer himself. And then, immediately went to the point, just said, I'd love to hop on a 15-minute call. Here's a link to my pitch deck. Hope to hear back from you. And then he replied and basically said something along the lines of, cool startup, but unfortunately I don't have the time to discuss it and any further right now. Which in a way that's a no. But then also he replied and he called my startup a cool startup. So now that's on my pitch deck now. A quote by Steve Wozniak saying "cool startup." Yeah, so it's you just sometimes have to take the first step, because the other thing is, I think people might assume that reaching someone like Steve Wozniak isn't easy, and I'm sure that I got very lucky. But that being said, at the same time that I reached out to him, I also reached out to a couple of other famous founders, and half of all of the ones that I reached out to replied. So 3 out of 6 actually replied to me. So if you're clever about how you reach out, you'd really be surprised who you can actually get talking with. Where you think otherwise think you might not be able to. So yeah, I mean, it's always worth a shot, and with everything being remote, in many ways, it's even easier to do so.
Yeah, we've been quite amazed from the response from just doing this podcast, how much now we have a little bit more reach, just by asking, because we're like, hey, here we are, we're making something, we're putting ourselves out to the world. Are you interested? Or what's your thoughts? Or would you like to have a conversation? And it's just been pretty incredible, because before doing this, you would always think that those doors are closed to you. And maybe part of it is you didn't have any social validation or social proof showing that, you're a person worth talking to. But in your sense, you're like, hey, I'm a founder. Here's my company. Love to have a conversation. And even that small little win of him looking at it and responding to you is incredible, because you would have never had that opportunity before.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
your stories. Apologies. Go ahead, Karl.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, I think another component of it that you just touched on as well is, I think some people might feel like they are being a burden when they reach out to someone who is far more established than themselves. But the thing is, people can choose which emails they want to reply to, or which emails they just want to, bin. So, I don't think that's your decision. You shouldn't just put a barrier in your place, essentially. And the other thing is, I don't think that I'm better than anyone else, but I don't think that anyone else is better than me. So, and I think that's probably a good mindset to have in general. So, I reached out to Steve Wozniak. I was hoping he would reply, and he did, which is fantastic. But I wasn't sort of thinking, oh, I'm going to burden him, because if it's such a burden, he can just delete my email and forget about it, So yeah.
No, what I was gonna say is your story about reaching out to Woz and getting a reply, and just because you asked. I mean, it's the same thing. Tanner and I, small town people from Nebraska, and here we are talking to Karl from Revolancer, who lives in Wales. I mean, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool either way. And we talked about this the last couple of episodes. Is I think people are just scared to ask, and I definitely was. I still am to some degree, but I'm starting to learn that people, for the most part, want to help other people. Especially, you're not asking for money. You're not asking for anything crazy. You're asking for their insight, their expertise, an hour of their time. If they can, I think more people than not are willing to help others, and in that, which is really cool to see. You're starting to see a global community, everyone from low level, people who just have a great idea, up to, Woz from Apple, right? That you have this global reach of people who understand that it's hard out there. And some people have experience that they can help others with. And there's a lot of good sharing out there. I think people assume business is selfish. And I don't think that's accurate. Would you agree?
Oh, I certainly would agree. Yes, I mean, in everything I've seen, other entrepreneurs, are willing to help out and give feedback, to an enormous degree. And I think it's because starting a business is such a, it's oftentimes quite a lonely road. So you want to help others who are starting out as well.
Yeah, on that vein, I guess, what do you find to be some of the hardest obstacles for people, starting a business and making a success?
I mean, so essentially for a founder, I mean, in my position, my two main responsibilities are making sure that we have good company culture and also making sure that we don't run out of money. I think for an early stage tech startup, that second one is, very tricky sometimes. So pitching to different investors, taking lots of calls, especially with the market right now, it's much harder than it was, say, a year ago. Um, I'd say, yeah, I mean, I face lots of challenges, but I don't sort of spend too much time dwelling on that. I more think, what can I do to overcome this obstacle and, and get closer to achieving what I need to achieve. I don't think that there is anything necessarily, that I can't do given enough learning, given enough um, going at it. I'm sure I'm wrong about that, but that's my mindset anyway, and it makes, I guess, these challenges a bit less daunting. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned that the market today, for especially for startups and I'm sure investments, are substantially more difficult than it was a few years ago. Is there any like strategies or ways you've transitioned your business to this new investor climate?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one thing that's much more important now than before, it sounds so silly to say, but it's revenue. Before investors were kind of willing to back an idea, whereas now they want to see more significant traction. So, it's basically just a case of understanding what people are looking for and then making sure you adapt to that. So, we're cracking down on generating more revenue, and kind of running an even tighter ship, and that comes across well to investors. So you just um, and the other thing is, if you can kind of, the best companies, like for example Amazon, eBay, they came out of recessions. They were sort of founded in recessions. Or no, they were founded in a bubble. They then came a recession. They sort of survived that recession, and now they're very strong companies. So I think, if you can ride this out, you'll be much stronger on the other side because you'll have a much better company, and also all your competition will have probably shut down. And now suddenly, when things are bouncing back, you're in a much stronger position than anyone else. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, just having a good understanding of the market, being a bit more proactive in your outreach, and then just focusing on what investors are looking for, which is currently, diminishing risk by looking more closely at revenue numbers.
All right. So you're a rock star entrepreneur, and you're CEO of Revolancer. You have staff. You're focusing on revenue. Like, your brain has to be full. What do you? Let's talk about Karl for a second. What, Tell me some of your hobbies. What do you do outside of just like be a rock star?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure if I would give myself that title, but I appreciate
I
it
did. You can blame
nonetheless.
it on me.
But yeah, in terms of things I do outside of work, I mean, my New Year's resolution is to develop a better work-life balance. So, I mean, not, I mean, I have a habit, essentially because I started my journey by, trying to start online businesses as a means of procrastinating from doing schoolwork. This has always been my hobby more than I've seen it as a job. So now that I do it full time, I have to be very careful to not go completely overboard with it. But I mean, outside of that, I enjoy going for walks. In the past, I've enjoyed going running. I'm kind of getting back into that again, but that's a very dangerous, slippery slope for me because I get so unhealthily competitive with myself that I overstress myself. I gave myself a knee injury before, from my running kind of antics. So getting better with that. But yeah, I mean, sort of, it's unfortunately right now not really that much outside of it. But this year I'm focusing on work life balance because I think if you have a better work life balance, you can be much more productive in the slightly shorter time that you work than otherwise.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so hard to manage because you're always on that slippery slope with burnout. Have you ever had that where you're just completely just wrecked and done, or if you found ways to kind of navigate around avoiding burnout?
Well, yes. I mean, I burned myself out very badly towards the end of 2021, but I mean, it could have been easily avoided. It was because I was working essentially 11, 12-hour days, 6 days a week. Probably on the Sunday, I would find an excuse to do some work too. Um, and that just really wasn't healthy. And I remember actually getting towards the end of the year, I really burnt myself out. At that point, I took a few days off work, and I think to that time point, I hadn't taken a single day off. Um, and I remember as well at the time I had been trying to fundraise all summer. I was getting nowhere with it. I remember we had we had a limited amount of money left. And then I took a week off. Things were feeling terrible. Then I sort of, when I came back, I thought, okay, so we're kickstarting the fundraising again. Within 2 days, we had closed our pre-seed round, which was just, an absolutely insane experience. So, I mean, it just goes to show that being a sort of a startup founder is such a roller coaster ride. You can go from such a low to such a high, and then, keep going between them. But yes, I mean, I burned myself out badly. I definitely learned from it. So now I take both weekend days off. I also don't kind of work for 12 hours. I'll work for probably about 10 hours most days. And that already makes a big difference.
One of the big things going on right now in the world is AI. There's discussions on the image front, the language based front, what it can make with video, how it's going to change the world. You mentioned to us that you kind of have a background in artificial intelligence, machine learning. Can you kind of give us your take on everything?
Yeah, I mean, I did a bachelor's degree in artificial intelligence and robotics, so I'm by no means an expert, but I have some level of underlying understanding. Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest interesting thing I can say here is I I don't believe a lot of the media rhetoric around how AI is going to change the world in the short term. In the sense that I think it will change things, but I think this whole narrative about it, destroying so many jobs in the short term, I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's sort of a tool that will help make jobs more efficient, but it'll also create new opportunities. So sort of, let's say you are somebody who writes articles for a blog. Rather than you needing to write all of the articles, you can get ChatGPT to write it for you, and then you just edit it at the end. Because the problem with ChatGPT is that sometimes it makes mistakes, but it will act very confidently. One thing I asked ChatGPT to do was prove that 0.9 recurring is equal to 1. And it kind of gave me a step-by-step breakdown. And one of the steps was, and therefore 8 divided by 9 is equal to 1, and therefore 0.9 recurring is equal to 1, which is just complete nonsense, but it was talking about it in such a confident way. And I think that's the issue, for it to actually be good enough to be left to its own devices and generate useful content. I think we're still quite a way away from that. But certainly it's a way to help refine, certain jobs and certain tasks. But I don't think that, people there isn't a reason to panic in the near term. Long term, quite possibly it could replace a lot of jobs and kind of, do this more exaggerated stuff. But in the short term, not really. I'd say that's still probably decades away at this point.
Yeah, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how like the short-term impacts of it too. And I just really feel like it's just like you're saying, it's going to be a really useful tool and it's going to allow each person to have a lot more leverage in their output. So it's a lot less mundane stuff around like having to type emails, having to write these things or brainstorm. You can just get to it much faster. There was a quote, I believe it was Naval. He was talking about it, and he's like, it's kind of a new modern day calculator for people. So rather than having to divide everything by longhand and figure out, this answer, you can just hit the buttons and it will do it. By no means or have accountants disappeared, but now the tools make them able to support many more companies rather than just be one of many bookkeepers within a company or things like that. So that's how I kind of envision the short term of it.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good way to think about it. Kind of being like a calculator and replacing doing division by hand. Um, I mean, and in the same vein, I was looking at potentially using ChatGPT, to help out with stuff we do at Revolancer. But the conclusion we came to is we still need to hire people to kind of supervise what it does to such a degree where it just makes sense to hire the people. And if they use ChatGPT as a starting point, then refine it from there, who it doesn't matter. But, it's not something that I would want to leave. Same thing with what the other example you mentioned with accounting. There are some great accounting softwares out there that can, in the most cases, automate what sort of the average bookkeeper will do. But the problem is, I don't trust the output of that enough to want to submit that to the tax authority, because it might have made a glaringly obvious mistake. So even in that case, I want a chartered accountant to sort of at least review what it's outputting and then sign off on it. Otherwise it'd make me too nervous. I think same problem with self-driving cars. Again, I don't think that that's something that's going to be realistic for a long time to come still, especially from a regulatory compliance sort of angle. But yeah, it's a very
I
interesting
think
thought
one of
about
the
the
best ways to
calculator.
look at it, yeah, I think one of the best ways to look at it right now is it's another tool in your tool belt. It's not the answer. AI right now is not the answer. It's not the solution to the world's problems. It's a tool to help solve them. And back to startups and entrepreneurs, I think ChatGPT can be an extra special tool for those trying to start a business because, writing copy, for example, for me, complicated. If I wanted to go out and write a blog post today, it would be just trash because this is not how my brain works. I'm not a copy editor. But ChatGPT can, once again, you don't just copy and paste and say that's good, but it can produce that information for you. You go through, add your own voice. If you consider it a tool, not an answer, I think it's a lot better. But I think that the functionality for people wanting to get into entrepreneurship is huge. It's a second brain that can help them produce some of those ideas that, we just don't have the skill sets for that at that time.
Yeah, I completely
Yeah,
agree.
oh, yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I feel like too with startups, it allows them to get more resources that they might not have had otherwise. Like you're saying with copyright, if you're a founder and you're not good at writing copy or coming up with content and things like that, it at least gives you that leg up you wouldn't have had before. So you can be a lot leaner on the initial stages without having to pay someone who is a copywriter, which I've done in the past, and it's very expensive and it's a big process. Same goes with certain levels of image generation, or as it gets more into coding and all sorts of different things, it can enable one person who maybe hasn't been so deeply proficient in all those aspects to be a lot more effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So Karl, we have this running thing with guests on our show. And we love to get ideas. One thing we found, and maybe we're totally off, is that a large quantity of entrepreneurs and founders, they like to read. Knowledge intake is very important. We love to get book recommendations. Even if it's an old book, a new book. Are you reading anything now? Have you read anything recently that just blew your mind and you'd love other people to get out there and try or get or experience?
Sure. So I kind of came to terms with the fact that I'm not much of a book person. And I have a replacement for that, and it's called Blinkist. It's a great app where basically
Mm-hmm.
they summarize non-fiction books, and you can either read them or you can listen to it as like a 15 to 30-minute audiobook, which is great for pairing up with going to the gym or going for a walk or something like that. I have actually read some books too, though, so I can give you some good recommendations. I mean, one of them is definitely 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel is an absolute must read for anyone trying to start a disruptive early stage tech startup. Power by Jeffrey Pfeffer is a fantastic book. Jeffrey Pfeffer is a professor of organizational behavior at Stanford University. It's a very good book. kind of just around, it's not just for entrepreneurs, but it very much covers the bases there too. But it's also just for how to progress, even faster in a traditional job. So that's a very good book. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie is a classic as well. I mean, it's a very good book. As long as you don't overdo it, you can kind of spot people who have read that book and kind of follow it, to the T, and it comes across badly. But yeah, I'd say those are three books that had an impact in my life, and I would definitely recommend reading.
I never thought of people taking How to Win Friends and Influence People too far, but you're absolutely right. You meet that person who says your name like 30 times.
Yeah.
I never thought of that like that.
Yeah, as I've been dealing more with like sales things too, if there's like a hot new sales book, Never Split the Difference was a big one, where it was like the FBI negotiation tactics and different things. And then you can start seeing little pieces on inbound cold calls that you start receiving, and you're like, I know what course they're doing. They're doing question-based selling, or they're doing this stuff, and you can start picking it apart pretty well. It's always fun.
Perfect. Well, Karl, so we're getting close to our time here, but with Revolancer going, your focus on revenue, your team is going full force. What's next? What's next for Karl? What's next for Revolancer? What's kind of what's on the horizon for you?
Well, I mean, our end goal is to completely revolutionize the freelancing space and bring it into the 21st century, because I think, there has been a serious lack of innovation in this space for far too long. I identified that when I was 15. I identified it again, that nothing has changed when I was 21 or so, and that's when I started Revolancer. But beyond that, so after I've exited, hopefully, exited a company or two, in the long term, in a couple of decades, my dream is to start a venture capital fund, and then basically fund early stage tech startups and mentor them and sort of help them, in ways which my investors currently are with me. So that's a very exciting prospect for me as well, other than entrepreneurship. But until then, I'll definitely be starting, tech, well, I don't know if it's tech startups necessarily, but definitely starting different companies, and just, continuing to have fun on the journey.
I love that. And your focus with Revolancer, with you personally, a future VC, your focus has always been on helping people. Your quote about, commissions, 20% commissions are crazy, things like that. You keep this focus on helping people. It's not just about, I want Karl to be a billionaire. It's about providing value, and you keep pushing that even in your dreams. And I have no doubt you'll achieve them of starting your own venture capital. You're doing it out of a place of providing help and assistance and mentorship to people. And what as Tanner and I go on and we meet more people, what we find is the most successful people always come from a place of wanting to help others, not just about making themselves rich or famous or anything like that. It's about putting it out into the world and helping others achieve their goals. And I've seen everything, all of your your website, your LinkedIn, what you're talking about, your future goals, all are based around other people and helping build them up. And I just want to say personally, thank you. You're doing some amazing things over there in Wales. We're seeing it over here. It's really inspiring to see your drive, and then your drive transform and helping other people.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, that means a lot. And it's like I was saying earlier, if you want to make a lot of money, then just go get a job in finance. Making a lot of money is, something that I hope to do one day. It's definitely not my driving factor. My driving factor is to create a positive impact in lots of people's lives, so especially freelancers to start with, because that's a problem that's, near and dear to my heart. But I'm sure in the future there'll be other things too. And also with starting a VC, I mean, most VCs aren't making a lot of money at all. It might sort of seem like they are, but VCs, they raise a fund, other investors' money, then charge like a tiny management fee, and then deploy that capital into startups. And then, obviously the gains go back to the investors, maybe with a, small percentage there again. So starting a VC is also not a smart idea if you're trying to make a huge amount of money. But that's not what it's about. For me, it's about the excitement of enabling lots of different startups that I think have promise, and helping playing a part in making those ideas a reality. That's what drives me.
That's fantastic. Well, Karl, it's been an absolute treat to have you join us here today. If you want to kind of share where people can find you online, maybe where they can read more about you and your companies.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for having me. It's been fantastic. And well, if you're interested in freelancing or hiring a freelancer, then check out revolancer.com. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn directly as well, if you want to have a conversation. I need to get much better at checking my LinkedIn messages, because I tend to get quite a lot. But yeah, I mean, do feel free to send me a message, and I'm sure I'll get back to you.
All right. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining us. We'd like to thank everybody who listened. If you haven't already, subscribe to our channels, whether that be on Spotify, on YouTube, or anywhere where you can find podcasts. We'll see everybody here next week. But Wyatt, is there anything you wanted to say before we close out?
No, our interview calendar is filling up quickly. If you wish to come on the Decentralized Opportunity podcast, please reach out to us on our socials. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, probably a few other places. But reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you, and we'd love to put you on the schedule. And it's only going to get more and more. Lots of interviews coming up. We have so much interest. It's really fantastic, and we'd love to hear from anyone who listens. So thank you, audience. Thank you so much, Karl. I will let you get back to your day. It's been great, and hopefully we can talk to you again in the future and see what's going on again, all right?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.